Welcome, and thanks everyone for joining today's webinar on the Path to Equity Policy Guide for Richmond Connects. I'm Kelly Rowan, Transit Planning and Mobility Program Manager with the Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility here in the city of Richmond. I'm excited to be spearheading this forward-thinking policy guide for Richmond Connects, the multimodal plan for the city of Richmond. First, we'll start with a quick intro of who we are and how we got here. Seeing the need for an internal office focused on equitable multimodal planning, on equitable mobility and accessibility programming, and on ensuring transit equity, the Mayor, LeVar Stoney, formed this office in the fall of 2020. OETM is tasked with planning and program development for the multimodal transportation network in Richmond. This office manages the shared mobility programs, the city's multimodal plan Richmond Connects, the transportation demand management programs, and serves as a liaison to many other regional and local boards and commissions which deal in the planning for Richmond's multimodal network. Additionally, the office manages the Main Street station as both a multimodal hub and a revenue-generating event space. As the office deals not only with short and long-range transportation planning, but also manages real-time the mobility programs such as bike share and scooters, we are located under the Department of Public Works and have an office in the Seaboard building in the shadow of Main Street Station. However, today on this webinar, we're focused on the development of the Path to Equity, specifically the development of the Equity Weighting Framework and outreach to develop that framework that will be used later in the Richmond Connects planning process to help direct resources to those areas and for those citizens for whom transportation has traditionally underserved. The Path to Equity Policy Guide will have three main components. It will reiterate the transportation-specific vision, goals, and objectives developed in the Richmond 300, A Guide for Growth Master Plan. We recognize a hard work and community effort to develop this policy language and want to reiterate, not recreate, this focus. However, we anticipate the plan will align these policy elements with the investment need categories to clarify relationships between the existing objectives in the master plan and the more traditional categories of transportation need that align with the programmatic and funding pools often associated to implement projects, policies, and programs. This process will be largely done in-house with transportation planning professionals and more serves to exemplify how the existing policy language covers all bases of transportation need and how it meets various planning requirements and aligns with other regional and statewide planning. The focus of the outreach and the largest element of new policy to be developed through this process is the development of equity factors. These will be goal-like statements that articulate equity concerns and the desired outcomes related to equitable access and mobility. We must acknowledge and articulate clearly how transportation has played a role in limiting access to opportunities and has often presented barriers to the most marginalized communities. Through this direct and frank conversation about the systemic injustices and inequities created by transportation, our aim is to get results. The development of strong equity factor language will lead to meaningful programs, policies, and projects which address these systemic issues. So we are in the blue box right now. This part of the planning effort is anticipated to run until late summer, early fall. After the policy guide is completed, we will kick off the full Richmond Connects process. We anticipate this being two main sections. The first will be the Equitable Mobility and Accessibility Action Plan. That's going to include the existing conditions, identify multimodal needs, and identify priority recommendations for those top needs. Recommendations would include projects, strategies, programs, and policies, and those are at the 5 to 10 year planning horizon. For the scenario plan, we anticipate doing a scenario exercise where we would hold the land uses steady and look at big picture transportation investment scenarios, asking, what if we invested in X, Y, or Z over the next 25 years? What would that mean for transportation equity? It's important to note this planning effort is fundamentally different from the 2013 planning effort, the last Richmond Connects update to the plan, in that it highlights resolving problematic inequities in the transportation network for targeted underserved populations. This plan is also necessitated as progress has been made on many of the objectives and recommendations in the 2013 plan. Thus, the existing conditions are different than those documented in 2013. Additionally, the city completed a new master plan, Richmond 300, since the 2013 Richmond Connects plan was completed. The Richmond 300 master plan lays out a new direction for the multimodal network. Overall, the transportation landscape, including technological improvements and socially valued core principles guiding transportation decision making, have changed in the last eight years. Driving this planning effort is a renewed focus on equity. This process must acknowledge how transportation can play a role in resolving problematic injustices of the past and how improvements can lift barriers to accessing opportunities today. The goal of the policy guide is to lay a solid foundation upon which the Richmond Connects plan will be based. The policy guide, along with the outreach and policy for the RVA Green 2050 plan, the draft language and the equity agenda coming from the mayor's office, and the vision, goals, and objectives from the master plan will inform the Richmond Connects process for identifying priority multimodal transportation needs and will help inform how those needs can be addressed. The strategies that are being developed in RVA Green 2050 and those already developed in the Richmond 300 plan will be brought back into the planning process at the recommendations phase of Richmond Connects. However, the policy, such as the community priorities identified in the RVA Green plan and the priorities in the equity agenda, will help guide the equity factor development at this phase. The Richmond Connects plan will prioritize transportation needs and identify strategies, programs, and projects to address those top needs. The metrics that will be used to assess transportation need will be equity and accessibility focused. They will first relate back right here. They'll relate back to each of the Richmond 300 objectives through the transportation need linkage. More additional transportation-centric measures at this step will assess accessibility, safety, maintenance, reliability, economic impact, sustainability, and the like. And those measures will result in scores for all of Richmond's nodes, corridors, and neighborhoods. And again, these are needs scores. So that's going to be kind of your more traditional transportation plan metrics and data coming in. And the element that's really going to be new and innovative is the development of our equity factors that will result in an equity weighting framework. So the equity factors that are developed in the policy guide will also relate to a set of needs metrics. These will score Richmond's nodes, corridors, and neighborhoods, again, so the same geographies, but will provide data-driven assessment of equity-related needs. The metrics will be developed in the Richmond Connects process, but the equity factors on which they are based will be completed at this phase of the process. So then those geolocated equity factor scores will add extra weight to the transportation needs, and then we'll prioritize needs that will bubble up to the top for which we'll develop recommendations. So again, keeping in mind the end goal, developing metrics that assess both transportation and equity needs for the Richmond Connects process, we can see the importance and the implications of this policy guide work that we're doing now. This phase will ultimately lay the foundation on which programs, projects, and policies get moved forward. The priorities set now in the policy will dictate what multimodal improvements are ultimately made a priority and where they're needed most. The plan will recommend improvements to walking, biking, driving, van pooling, other shared mobility, transit, rail, and all other modes. The recommendations will ultimately prescribe a path to achieving equity in transportation. So to step back a minute, where are we now? So we're just on that first phase of the policy guide. So the existing vision, goals, and objectives are, again, pulled directly from the Richmond Master Plan. Those will be organized into investment needs categories, working with planning in the city. And then the outreach will focus on the development of equity factors for future equity weighting framework. So how are we engaging the public, which is largely focused on developing the equity factors? This is our overall public engagement schedule. You can see that we're in the middle of a robust outreach effort that we began in April planning for this process. We convened an internal steering committee comprised of city staff across multiple departments. That steering committee has helped refine the goals of the policy guide and the overall outreach approach. They also helped us develop and review the survey and have helped us spread the word on the effort. In terms of public outreach, we developed a survey and we've kicked off the survey process in late June. It is a MetroQuest survey that is situated online, but we also have developed a paper copy in Spanish and in English. The online version is also available in Spanish. To date, we've had 3 pop-up events, our Tacos for Transportation events. Some of you may have come to some of them, where we've shared information and collected surveys. So that's my little trucks on the timeline. So at each of these events, participants had the option of doing the survey on an iPad with one of the Office of Community Wealth Building ambassadors. They were present to help walk participants through the survey. And attendees were also given the option to do it on their own device or to complete a paper copy. As a best practice in equitable outreach, appreciation for time spent giving feedback was demonstrated through each participant getting free tacos. So it was really fun events. We have also been incentivizing others who couldn't make it to the events to complete the survey with a drawing for $100 gift cards. Also, part of this outreach is this little bubble. That's you guys, this webinar right now. We plan to, when we have a draft plan, after the advisory committee is met, bring it back to this group and to anyone else who's able to join us for a webinar. So as we move forward and we wrap up the survey mid-August, we will begin to analyze the data on survey participants. Actually, what I went to say is mid-survey. So right now, we have some of the data on the survey participants, and we are planning some more targeted advertising and possible intercept surveying or targeted canvassing taking place to make sure that we're getting a sample of Richmond that is representative of everyone, of all races, ages, ethnicities, family sizes, incomes, and the like, that all areas of Richmond are represented as well. So then at the end, down here, we'll take the survey data and working with our internal steering committee, we will parse out some of the priorities and the themes from that data that will inform the equity factors. We're then planning for a mid-September advisory committee meeting to draft the actual language for the equity factors. I think a few of the people on the call today are on our advisory committee as well, so I appreciate you guys jumping on to get a head start. So the advisory committee is comprised of a mix of planning and transportation-related professionals, various advocacy groups committed to equity and environmental justice, and representation of the various neighborhoods and growth nodes via paid city ambassadors. So those city ambassadors, we sent out a call this spring for folks that were interested in representing their various neighborhoods on the committee. We received over 40 applications. We have selected 20 ambassadors that represent a cross-section of all different types of people and backgrounds. We have a training plan for them in early September to give them a little bit of information on transportation and equity planning to prep them for the meeting. And then we are asking the ambassadors to come to the meeting and then also to go back into their communities, pass out a little bit of information, and engage their community on the Path to Equity plan. We're so excited to have such committed Richmonders to help with this process and offer the insight and the community consciousness of where they live. And again, those are through a paid position with the city that's in line with best practices on equity outreach, equitable outreach, that we have to pay people for their time. We can't expect people to spend an afternoon 4 hours without being compensated. So additionally, being true to our desire to do that outreach equitably, we're also offering this stipend for some of the other folks that are participating on our committee that their organization doesn't offer them salaries or wages. Again, we feel that advisory committees traditionally are made up of professionals who are paid to give us their input. And we have to respect the time and value of having people from our community participate on these advisory committees. We have to have everyday citizens at the decision-making table for it to be equitable. As noted, the advisory committee will meet in mid-September and work on that equity factor language. It'll be about 80 people and will be mostly breakout groups to work through the development of that language. We anticipate that the steering committee will review and approve the final policy guide late September. So the outreach, a little bit more about the outreach, these pop-up events that we have had. We've had 3 pop-up events, and then we've also attended a couple other events, just kind of jumped on the coattails. But our 3 tacos for transportation events, just generally purpose is to educate and bring about an awareness about our new office, since we haven't been around for very long. We're also trying to build trust with communities. We're trying to kind of reverse, instead of the city asking people to come to us coming to them, trying to incentivize people to participate and show them that we value their time, with various different incentives. Also, the goal is to get surveys to be completed, and get surveys to be completed that by people that maybe aren't traditionally the type of people that do our surveys. We're also just trying to create a fun environment around transportation planning and to engage meaningfully and have it not be kind of the stuffy experience, but rather like a genuine and genuinely fun experience to come and learn about transportation and give us your feedback. So for those events and just outreach in general, we've been working with the local radio stations. We've had Community Clovia do a couple spots on our process, and then we've relied really heavily on boosted social media posts. Hopefully, you guys have all seen it in your Facebook feed. But that's been our general approach. So here's just some, I gotta show off our first Talk to Transportation event was at Gilpin, and had some of our ambassadors. You can see here our buddy Kim and a few other folks. They were doing a really good job walking around, getting people to come over, do the survey. We were handing out information. We had paper surveys. We had the iPads. We had some water bottles to give away from the Vision Zero team, and it was just a great event overall. And then we've done it twice more. And then we also had some people that were at the most recent National Night Out event down in Southside. We engaged a lot of people there as well. So we appreciate anybody that's helped us spread the word about those events, and we look forward to continuing to find innovative and exciting ways to engage people in the city of Richmond, and also to engage people outside, because that's more COVID safe. So that's really was the origin of this idea, was we've got to do this outside. Let's do a taco truck. So we've really had fun doing it, and I think we've had some good conversations. So just in general, how are we doing with the survey? You can see we started off a little slow, and then we started our big social media push, and that gave us a lot more traffic. We're a little bit over 1,000 participants right now, and we're still got almost a month to go. So we think we're doing pretty good. You can see kind of spikes at our events here, and here. The map is just a representation of where people have put in comments of their barriers to access. So we're getting fairly good coverage, but I just wanted to include this to say, as we start to see certain areas are underrepresented or certain groups are underrepresented, that we're going to do, we have an advertising agency who's helping us do some more targeted advertising, and also, again, doing some kind of innovative ideas like going to senior centers to collect survey responses to kind of access that older population, putting paper copies at the library or at bus stop to target transit-dependent people or folks that are, again, that older demographic that the online survey doesn't capture as well. So our goals overall for the whole Richmond Connects process is to engage rather at least 3% of Richmond citizens. So that's like around 6,800 people. And then for this policy guide effort, we just wanted to get to a third of that goal. So about 2,200 people, a little over, around 2,300 people. So that's our goal. We're getting there. Our other goals we've set ourselves is for 50% of our participants to have never participated in a public planning process. So we're really trying with this innovative outreach to do something that will get to the communities that don't usually take the time or have the time to do a transportation survey. We also want to have a fairly representative sample. This isn't going to be like a statistically significant sample, but we do want to kind of match our participation rates by race and income and family size within plus or minus 10% of the actual breakdown of the city. We also have set ourselves a lofty goal of participants will rate the quality of our outreach as good or excellent at least 75% of the time. So we're trying to track and hold ourselves accountable and make sure people are satisfied with the way that we're engaging. And then we've also set that very important goal of at least 7% of participants will not have a computer at home or will not have an internet subscription. That's kind of a subset of people that's a lot larger in Richmond than people think, and they often get left out, especially when we're doing online only surveys. So we're have some ways to reach those communities as well. So this was my time to just pause for a minute. That's kind of the overview, and I'd love to take any questions if anybody has any so far. Brad?
So I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment. We do have one question in the chat box. Who will be doing the surveys to discover new equity factors? And I think you touched on that a little bit, but you might want to go in a little bit more detail about who's doing the surveys to discover the new equity factors.
So who is distributing the survey? So our office, the Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility, at the events we had our city ambassadors, which is a program to pay wages to City of Richmond residents through the Office of Community Wealth Building. They're basically professional canvassers. They're a really awesome team, and they know how to walk people through surveys and engage directly with all different types of Richmonders. Who I feel like there maybe was another implied part of that question too.
They did put the word new in all caps, so I think the focus there might be on discovering the new equity factors.
So I don't think that any of this would be, I guess new is the wrong word, to newly articulate in a transportation plan the needs related to equity. I think that equity, I mean, we've had equity concerns since Richmond's foundation. I'm not saying that the equity concerns are new, but rather that they would be newly articulated in our transportation plan, which traditionally transportation plans, if they consider equity at all, it's like one of several goals and often kind of like a side shoot. And we're trying to recenter transportation on equity as like the driving factor for our needs assessment. Still considering the other types of transportation needs, but making equity the focus. So no, it's not new, newly articulated. And newly articulated in relation to transportation, because we know, we know injustices of the past, but then to take it a step further, like we did on the survey, and say these are the transportation injustices, and then to take it a step further and say how in a transportation plan can we acknowledge and address these inequities and these injustices moving forward with our policies, programs, and funding.
And we have a follow-up question that just came in. Are you still looking at other ways to engage residents? Sometimes benefit-based surveys are not done with a lot of thought.
I think right now as we begin to get and assess the data on who have done the survey so far, like I was saying, we have an array of ideas, and we have a advertising consultant on who's going to help us target certain areas, target certain neighborhoods, maybe this certain apartment complex or certain places that might have a high representation of one of the groups that we're looking at, that's underrepresented in our survey. We do plan to do some targeted outreach, kind of as that information becomes available.
And apologize, I'm trying to follow. There's a lot of action popping up in the chat box, but one of the questions is what does benefit-based survey mean? Can we explain that term? And that was actually the term that was used in the previous question. So I don't know if that's a term that you're necessarily using, Kelly.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they specifically mean by that. But if I can't see the chat box when I'm in presenter mode, but if whoever was putting that in the chat box wants to put a link or something, or like a little clarification, I could maybe speak to it.
Okay. And they did ask which advertisement agency, which leave it to you.
Yeah, it's Pulsar, who's a small minority-owned business in the city of Richmond.
That's all the questions I'm seeing for now. Just a reminder, if you want to unmute yourself, you just have to click the smiley face in the bottom that says reactions and click raise your hand. And I'll be happy to unmute you if you have a question you would like to ask. So we'll kind of give this, I guess, a last call really quick. And I'm not seeing any hands being raised.
All right. Well, if you think of more questions, we got time at the end. So the rest of the chat today, I just wanted to, let me get back to here. I just wanted to talk with folks a little bit more in depth about the survey, and what we were thinking, and just to hopefully engage you guys to want to share the survey as we have this final month of data collection. So this, as I noted, the MetroQuest survey is a cool online interactive platform. The kind of landing page is just who we are, what are we doing, overall information. And so here's the link. And I thought, Josh, if you could put it in the chat box, or everyone can cut and paste it into your web browser if you want to, because it's definitely cooler as an interactive. So the first exercise when you click into the survey is really designed to get a sense of the impacts of these various transportation injustices that we've laid out and that we've identified, to get a sense of how those have had an impact on Richmonders' lives today. We asked that they rank the top 5 that they feel have had the biggest impact on the city. We're really trying to get a sense of what injustices are more strongly or more widely felt, kind of develop a sense of priority for the equity factors, and then for the metrics that will follow. We hope to capture some narratives on how these injustices have personally impacted communities through the open-ended comment box on each one. There's a little bubble, and people have been putting in comments. And then just in general, trying to educate and create a conversation around how to acknowledge and address the effects of these injustices. I feel like this is not necessarily a traditional transportation survey, but we feel like this is the focus of our planning effort, and we need to be getting some honest feedback and starting some of these honest conversations. So if you're looking at the survey right now, when you first go in it organizes these different each time, so that it's like hopefully not any bias. But as you click through them, you'll see we did a definition of each of the injustices. So as these are all intertwined, as you can imagine, we've really spent a lot of time. You'd be surprised at how much time on these narratives to explain what we meant by each one. We also tried to include some links on each one if folks wanted to read more, dig a little bit deeper. And we did try and make the explanations as simple and as direct as possible without losing the message. So you can see, like, transportation planning, that was one of the injustices that's highlighted, and it just gives a little bit of an overview and then kind of a little bit of an idea of the impacts that it might have and the impacts that we were considering. Folks can also, like I said, enter personalized information about each one. And again, these are really just to get a sense of the priorities of Richmonders when it comes to the transportation injustices to help shape that equity factor language. So the survey also collected basic demographic information, and then, or is collecting, household info, employment income data, location, transportation mode preferences, and past participation. And just a quick why, that's really to track our ability to have everyone represented in Richmond. A lot of people ask me why some of those questions are on there, and it's really to make sure that we aren't missing one group of people. So the last exercise was a mapping exercise related to barriers, and these are physical and psychological limits or barriers that kind of inhibit people's movement. This exercise is really designed to gain a sense of the experiential barriers to access. So we didn't necessarily just want more data on something like sidewalk condition, but really how something like that might make a Richmonder feel and how it impacts their ability to access something like work or recreation. So more of that experiential, lived experience of folks. Each category along the top, we had to pick some, there's a limit, but each category along the top, you could drag a pen down, and there's several options on the type of barriers that they may face, and there's also an other where they can always put in something that we hadn't thought of. And then there's just an other and a lack of services pin too. I can't move it. But yeah, there's an other for anybody that wanted to put in some other barrier to access. And maybe some of those aren't mappable, but there's kind of open-ended box where people can explain, I mean, generally Southside has this, or so we feel like these will be key in seeing kind of themes and barriers to access by region, and by potentially smaller geography, and we feel like they'll help shape that equity factor language as well. We're also using these to help validate and inform some different data that's being developed for the Richmond Connects full plan update process related to accessibility metrics. So it's going to help us out in a lot of different arenas. I'll also note that we have all of the mapped data that were comments from the Richmond 300 plan. Some of them got a little bit more fine detailed even than was considered in the master plan, and we have all those for the transportation plan and are going to look at those as well. And we are working with the RVA Green team as well to make sure that if somebody put in a public comment in any one of our processes about transportation barriers to access, transportation injustices, that that we have access to that comment as well, and are looking at all of that. So again, at the end of the survey, there's just a blank, any ideas moving forward, trying to get people to give us their email, typical stuff. And then that satisfaction question, like I said, we've set ourselves some goals in terms of making sure that folks feel like we're engaging them in a meaningful way. So that was all that I wanted to walk through today. My email is up here, and Dirana, like I said, our administrator for our office, our fearless leader, that's her email. And then this is the website if you want to get more information. And were there some things in the chat box, Brad?
We had a couple additional comments come in. The first was just a suggestion about possibly opening a hotline that would allow people to call in concerns or issues. And we could end the call with a survey to try and get more specific detailed input. So an idea there. Has there been any discussion of a hotline, Kelly?
Not for this effort, but I'm trying to think if Veronica maybe speak to that. Does Department of Public Works have any sort of hotline that people can call that eventually it would get to us? So somebody gave a comment. I'm not sure if she's still on.
She is. I just sent her a request to unmute.
Cool.
See if she chimes in.
I'm sorry, Kelly, what's the question?
The question is there any sort of a hotline that people can call, a phone number? I was saying there's nothing specifically for this effort, but I wasn't sure if DPW in general had any sort of a phone number hotline that people could call to give concerns or issues related to transportation.
I just had Cynthia's number. I mean, of course, we have our 311 system, and they can reference DPW and Richmond Connects, and that will get to our office. And then generally, I was just looking for Cynthia's number. I think over here, I got it here. So they can call the main number at the 646-6430, and we can get those concerns from that number as well.
Okay, so that's like a main DPW office line that it's probably the number that's listed on DPW's website as well. So that's 646-6430.
Yeah, 6430 is your DPW main. Yep. And that'll get you Cynthia. And again, 311 in general will get you, referencing Richmond Connects will get you to our office as well.
Thank you.
Great. And the one additional comment referencing that the impact that the interstates carving up the neighborhoods north and south of the river has had on equity in Richmond transportation, the impacts of that, and noting that there will likely be $1 billion in the federal stimulus bill for reconnecting communities that were impacted by the highway construction. And Maritza actually responded that they are actively moving ahead with an idea to reconnect Jackson Ward. So, Kelly, this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about, you touched on a little bit about the getting input on the past injustices and the impacts that those have had in Richmond.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say. And we even, that's one of, a multitude of past injustices that we've identified and that we researched and put into the survey. I think we call it neighborhood dissection is the short term, but we are with you. We think that is probably the one that comes to people's mind first when they think about how transportation has negatively impacted communities. And it's one that is so ever prevalent and visible in the city of Richmond and has a huge impact on communities today. So we encourage people to do the survey and to put that they're number one. And I think, like Maritza said, the master plan really identifies that as a huge area of concern and an area that we need to make some significant progress. And I think when we do the needs assessment for Richmond Connects, the circuitous trips that are made around 95 as a barrier and around 195 as a barrier to access, I have no doubts in my mind that that will pop up as a big red line, or however we annotate it, because that is a huge barrier to access that our residents still face on a daily. So I agree.
That's all I have in the chat for now. I guess we'll do one more last call to see if anybody has any final questions or thoughts. And again, feel free to raise your hand if you would like to be unmuted.
And I'll also add, please share the survey. If you go to rva.gov/connects, there's a link for the English and the Spanish version. And the link for the survey should also still be in the chat box.
And we have one additional question. Is there a way to connect with neighborhood advocates?
So for the participants to connect with neighborhood advocates, or for us to connect. So we're connecting with neighborhood advocates through our ambassador program. We have 20 people, like I said, that are from various neighborhoods across Richmond, some of which are also the community wealth building ambassadors, most of whom all live in RHA communities. And like I said, we're having them, like all of those folks, go back out into their communities to try and disseminate this information, not coming from, random lady me, but somebody that's actually in the community. But for you personally to connect with community activists, was that the question?
Advocates.
Advocates. Who would be the best resource to connect with community advocates? I have to think about that one, because that's kind of a big question. And what kind of all of Richmond?
She just followed up. She's wondering how the community connects with community ambassadors. Can the community members seek them out?
Yeah, they're right now the Office of Community Wealth Building, the ambassadors who have helped with the surveys. I mean, they're employed on a different project, but they're out in their communities almost every day. Right now, they're out in the community with the American Rescue Plan survey that's asking the city how folks would like to spend the $77 million that the city is getting through the American Rescue Plan. And but if they ask them, about that survey, they can give them information. But in general, our ambassadors would also be that we're also hiring for this plan. People would be able to ask them for information as well.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions or hands raised at this moment.
Somebody else I saw it pop up.
So, note just popped out. Economic Development Community Planning Departments of the city have lists of neighborhood associations. They should be part of this group.
Yeah, so I sent this invite to our citywide list of community associations and neighborhood associations. So I think if somebody has a question about a specific neighborhood, or wants to get in contact with a representative from a certain neighborhood, I'm not sure Like I said, I can't see the chat box and speaker view. So, but if the intention is because somebody wants to make a connection with a specific neighborhood, you can email me and I can see if I can look up on that list and tell you who we have down. But yes, the invite for this webinar was sent to the list that we have at the city. And once again, that list is who we have, and that's who we traditionally engage. And we're trying really hard with our tacos for transportation events and with having ambassadors go out into the community and are trying to think of other ways to engage groups, to reach the people that we haven't necessarily reached. Because a lot of those people, we got really good input in the Richmond 300 process, and not that this is seeking exactly the same input, but there's still underrepresented groups of people that we would like to reach. And if whoever was asking that has any other ideas, we would be all ears. And my email is right here, and I'm always available to chat about ideas people have. I don't have all the answers.
Additional question, can you work with the Planning District Commission to gain more ideas to add to this project?
So we have the Plan RVA on our advisory committee, and we have a pretty extensive regional representation on the advisory committee, like the surrounding counties. So I think once we touch base with that group, we'll kind of reach that regional aspect. We also will engage that group many more times in the full Richmond Connects update. So for the policy guide, we're just having that group get together one time, but for the Richmond Connects update, I mean, we anticipate, probably 5 or 6 meetings of that group, which has that larger regional representation. But again, if anybody has any ideas and you want to ping me an email, that's me.
All right, and just to follow up that unsure if Plan RVA has an equity component to their process.
So Plan RVA, I don't want to get too much into their process, but I do know that they have identified environmental justice populations, and at least in terms of the project prioritization, projects get extra weight if they're in a zone that's like weighted for these environmental justice populations. So like I said, it's pretty complex how they do that, but I know that their equity is a factor in their process. Probably not centered as much as we hope it will be in our process. But if whoever said that also wants to follow up with me, I can connect you with who at Plan RVA I've spoken with about that.
Okay, that's all the comments I'm seeing at this time, and we are right at 5 o'clock.
Excellent. All right. Well, I assume everybody would like to go home if you're at work, and if you're not at work, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Everyone have a great afternoon.